I'm the Red Lady, and in relation to this spooky season and following the theme of vampires from my last video, I'm going to tell a short story set in the Celtic backdrop of Glamorgan, South Wales in the 1700s. So this is well before Bram Stoker's Dracula was written, and it is one of my local stories. Welsh folklore doesn't appear to have much in the way of vampire stories. They are there if you look hard enough, but very few. So they tend to be more related to haunted objects, objects that have spirit attachments or apparent vampiric spirit attachments. And in the case of this story, it is haunted furniture. So I will add some related links to the description box below if you want to check those out. So this is the story of the vampire chair of Glamorgan. So one evening in the early 1700s, a pious minister was riding his grey mare towards an old farmhouse in Glamorgan, where he was to stay before delivering a sermon the following evening. He was warmly greeted by the landlady of the farmhouse. He ate a good meal and was shown to the guest room where he slept very well that night. In the morning, he was up with a lark, as they say, and he noticed the room was furnished with old Tudor furniture, and not wishing to intrude upon the early morning domestic arrangements, he sat in a worn leather armchair near the window to read his Bible and muse over his sermons. He ended up dozing off for a short while, and when he opened his eyes, he found blood flowing quite heavily from the back of his left hand. So he rinsed it in the wash basin, and when it finally stopped bleeding, he looked at the wound and found it had the appearance of a bite. So he bound his hand in a handkerchief and later mentioned this to his host, who said that there must be a nail in the chair because several guests had complained of scratches on their palms when they sat there. So the minister delivered his sermon that day and thought little more about it. He went to bed that night and woke up in great discomfort with a pain in his left side that was like the gnawing of a dog, as he described. He got up, he lit a candle and pulled up his shirt to find his ribs covered in bites that were pouring with blood. Now, in the morning, he went to fetch his grey mare from the stable and was alarmed to find it had exactly the same bite marks on its neck. So he promptly bathed the horse's wounds and went inside the house, and at this point he complains to the landlady, telling her that there is a vampire in the farmhouse. And the landlady then admitted that 2 other ministers, while visiting the house, had suffered the same treatment. Now, the farmhouse used to be a dower house, and when it was converted into a farmhouse, several rooms were blocked off along with the previous tenants' library, books and belongings. But some of the furniture was still being used around the farmhouse, and that included the armchair and the bed that the minister sat in and slept in. Now, the previous tenant was an old antiquarian who disliked men of God and had apparently returned as a vampire. So a number of ministers were called in to exorcise the vampire, but it flatly refused to leave the library. So a dignitary of the Church of England was also called at some point to try and lay the spirit, but it bit him on the left hand and leg. So the vampire only left the house when its furniture was sold at auction. So, however, in 1840, an Elizabethan chair was advertised by an auction house as a vampire chair after it was discovered that anyone who sat in it found their hands scratched and bloody. So that's the story of the vampire chair of Glamorgan. Moral of the story, never mess with a dead person's library, I guess. I get that, I really do. But do I love my books enough to want to defend them in the afterlife and bite anyone who sits in my reading chair? No comment. Now, there is another story of a haunted vampire bed in Cardiff. An old Elizabethan four-poster bed. A man bought an old four-poster bed for an absolute song at a bankruptcy sale in Cardiff, and he put it in the best bedroom of the house where his wife and his 4-month-old baby slept while he was away. And on the first night, the baby was irritable and unsettled, and on the second night it cried and wailed, and the woman called the doctor, who prescribed something to help the baby sleep. And on the third night it cried and it shrieked, and sadly the baby died in her arms. So the doctor, upon examining the baby, he found there was a hole on the baby's throat that oozed blood, and said that something had appeared to have drained the blood, like sucking the contents out of an egg, as was described. So when the man returned, he decided that he was going to sleep in this bed. I'm assuming that the woman refused to sleep in the bed after that. I don't blame her. And so he did. And on the first night, he woke thinking that there were hands clawing at his neck. And on the second night, he felt he was being strangled. And on the third night, he had blood oozing from his neck. Now, apparently, a friend of his wanted to sleep in the bed as well to find out for himself if it was true. There's always one. And he also experienced the same thing. And nobody used the bed after that because it was then known as a vampire bed. Now, I have read that this bed still stands, but it is never used. But I'm not entirely sure if that's true or not. Was it the same bed as described in the first story where the minister woke with bites on his ribs? Did it come from that same farmhouse, I wonder? I have no idea. Although it is strange that the haunted furniture in both stories are situated in the Glamorganshire area. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like and do subscribe and hit the bell for notifications if you want to see more of my videos. I am the Red Lady and I will see you soon.